Meteorologists are at a loss to explain what is causing this weather and why it has taken quite a while.
It is the agenda for the 21st century you're living in today. For a brave new world where everything that you cherished and held true will no longer exist.
Well, one of the most serious things they're facing right now, Sherry, are surcharges, and you can definitely see that impact all around town. You know, across from 280 there at Lake Purdy, there is that sign there, and you can see it right there. It now reads Stage 4 Drought Emergency and talks about surcharges. From here on out, you're going to face a surcharge for any amount you use over 1,200 cubic feet at 400% per cubic feet. That is in addition to all of your normal charges. Birmingham Waterworks says the average residential customer uses less than 1,000 cubic feet. There are also going to be some new guidelines when it comes to watering your lawn. So now people with even numbered addresses are supposed to water on Mondays. Odd numbered addresses will water Fridays. You cannot water at all between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. on those assigned days. And right now you are not allowed to wash your car unless it is at a commercial car wash.
To give you some perspective on just how dangerous this drought is, take a look at this. You're looking right now at two sources for the Birmingham Waterworks, Shades Mountain Filter Plant, Lake Purdy, which is on the left. It has practically run dry, and the water levels of the Cahaba River, which you see there on the right-hand side of your screen, that, of course, is very, very low right now, causing us to be in this situation with this extreme drought emergency that we have.
People dig for water to drink and wash with. This riverbed in southern Madagascar would normally have water at this time of year, but the change in weather patterns as a result of El Nino has left it dry. It's the third consecutive year of drought in the south, and the UN says half the population don't have enough food. 60-year-old Fiamina was hoping to harvest cereal crops this year, but the only thing that's grown are cactuses. Her family are living off berries.
This is insane. Holy
High winds whipped this modest fire into a raging inferno. Firefighters began calling it the Beast.
Oh, you can feel the heat.
It's like nothing I'd ever seen before.
Holy This is crazy.
The Beast turns toward the city of Fort McMurray, and officials order a mandatory evacuation.
Talk about a white knuckle ride. You are just hoping that you're able to get out of town through the traffic before the fire catches up to you.
Oh my God.
Where do you even go? Where do you go to avoid this thing?
There's one main road in and out of town. You have no choice but to pack up a couple valuable items and drive out of there because your house is going to burn down.
Saturday marks the first World Tsunami Awareness Day. Now, the UN General Assembly designated November 5th as World Tsunami Awareness Day last December after a proposal by Japan. It commemorates the day in 1854 when a Japanese farmer set fire to rice sheaves which helped villagers evacuate in the dark after a tsunami struck the Kii Peninsula. In 2011, a tsunami triggered by an earthquake in East Japan killed over 14,000 people. The first WTAD focuses on education and evacuation drills. On Friday, more than 400,000 people in Japan's Wakayama Prefecture took part in an earthquake and tsunami drill.
What the fuck?
Around 1,800 primary schools in the Indian capital New Delhi have been closed as the city faced its most severe bout of air pollution in recent years. Official data show that breathing the air in the city on Saturday was the equivalent of smoking 40 cigarettes. The city has been enveloped in thick smog since last week's Diwali festival, which saw hundreds of firecrackers set off. It's also suffered from crop fires in agricultural areas in neighboring states of Haryana and Punjab. Experts say other factors, including weather patterns, inward wind, and low dispersion of pollutants, have also contributed to the problem.
The Paris Agreement is now in effect, but a UN report says the ambitious goals might not work like they're supposed to. The Paris Agreement is meant to cap global rising temperatures at 2 degrees Celsius, and in theory, it works. But the annual UN Emissions Gap Report says predicted 2030 emissions put world temperatures on track to rise 2.9 to 3.4 degrees this century, even if the Paris deal is followed to a T. Critics did raise concern about the Paris Agreement when it was in negotiations. They saw loopholes in legal procedures and claimed the seemingly weak terms made it easy to sign on. Supporters say that's not reason to throw the agreement out the window. The head of the UN Environment Program called it a step in the right direction. The deal will still slow climate change, just not enough to avoid serious effects.
Take the birds, bugs, and other critters you encounter on a daily basis for granted, that the world and the creatures that inhabit it will exist just as they do now, 20 years from now? Because a new report says you shouldn't count on it. In fact, the changes could come much sooner than you think. RT correspondent Anya Parmpil breaks down that report.
The World Wildlife Fund is breaking some devastating news, publishing numbers which suggest not only that our planet is going through a mass extinction, but that we could be seeing terrifying results in just a few years. Their report, released this week, took a comprehensive look at decades worth of scientific data. It found that from the year 1970 to 2012, animal populations across the planet plummeted by 58%. Not only that, but they predict that by 2020, less than 4 years from now, we're on track to bring that number up to 67%, or about 2/3 of the population.
Arctic sea ice is disappearing at an alarming rate, but scientists have had a hard time communicating that loss on an individual level. Now, new research helps put that loss in perspective. Scientists have found that roughly 3 square meters of ice is melted with every metric ton of CO2 emitted, and individuals in some Western countries reportedly emit an average of 10 metric tons per year per person. And that means an average Westerner's carbon footprint can melt more than 30 square meters of Arctic sea ice every year, and that's not slowing down. Despite global climate initiatives like the Paris Agreement and the Kigali Amendment, predictions have sea ice almost completely gone within about 2 decades. Melting Arctic sea ice is one of the largest visible signs of climate change, and it's declined rapidly in the last half-century. And while we've seen a lot of reports on the global impact of carbon emission, researchers say this is the first that shows individuals what impact they can have.
It's yet another smoggy day for Beijing. Extensive burning of fossil fuels means the Chinese capital seldom sees blue skies, and it only gets worse in winter. In a bid to address this problem, the country is taking various approaches that includes using electricity as a replacement. The electricity vehicle, or EV, is one of them.
This type of car has clean energy and spends only about 1 yuan for about a 4-kilometer drive. That's at least half the amount of conventional cars.
Next tonight, we're back on the case of that mystery illness now in 33 states and counting. At least 9 cases in Washington state alone. The polio-like condition causing paralysis, blamed for the death of a 6-year-old boy.
In Seattle tonight, a terrifying medical mystery. When 6-year-old Daniel Ramirez first got sick, it seemed so ordinary.
Had a fever, wasn't wanting to eat.
But it quickly escalated. They took him to Seattle Children's Hospital.
Basically, within a couple of hours, he was basically paralyzed.
Just before Halloween, Daniel died. Doctors suspect he had AFM, acute flaccid myelitis, a rare illness that can cause polio-like symptoms, including paralysis. Even more troubling, Seattle Children's is now seeing a cluster of cases, 9 suspected so far. Doctors now investigating why the sudden uptick in cases.
Whenever you see a cluster of illness like this, you got to jump on it, investigate it, figure out if they're related, and if so, what you need to do to stop them.
So far this year, 89 confirmed cases in 33 states. The cases here range in age from 3 to 14. So far, 5 of those kids have recovered enough to go home, but doctors here tonight remain very concerned, David.
In other story we're following for you, China's middle class will account for 1/3 of the nation's population in 2030. Their purchasing power reaching that of the European Union now, and that's according to a report by the Economist Intelligence Unit. The report says in 2030, about 35% of the Chinese population will have annual disposable income of over $10,000, up from the current 10% level. It says private consumption, including goods, services, and rent, will grow at an average yearly speed of 5.5%. The report says China's current consumer spending levels are what were seen in Malaysia in the 2000s.
At least one person has been killed in Indonesia following violent clashes between police and hardline Muslim protesters in Jakarta. There were ugly scenes as security forces fired tear gas and water cannon in an attempt to disperse a large crowd. The violence came after a huge rally in the capital in which protesters called for the city's Christian governor to be prosecuted for blasphemy. This protester said, "Our message is clear. If he is not declared a suspect today, we won't stop until it happens. We have already planned a 3-day movement. We urge all Muslims across Indonesia to rise up in their own region." The mass rally in Jakarta earlier on Friday saw an estimated 50,000 people march upon the presidential palace. The demonstration was triggered by accusations that the governor, who later apologized but is now under police investigation, had insulted Islam's holy book, the Quran.
A dark night for democracy, say many here in Turkey. Police forcing open the door of Figen Yüksekdağ, co-chair of Turkey's People's Democratic Party, the HDP. You don't have the right to enter my apartment like this, she says. Your prosecutors are thugs, so are you. A shocking overnight roundup. About a dozen HDP lawmakers detained, some now under arrest, including both party leaders.
The fire broke out shortly after midnight in the shanty town of Cantagalo in Lima. Witnesses say the flames spread quickly, tearing through dozens of homes. By the time firefighters were able to bring it under control 2 hours later, 300 houses had been destroyed and 500 families left homeless. The cause is under investigation, but it's believed the blaze may have been triggered by the flame from a candle. While no fatalities were reported, residents say they've lost everything.
That Cyber Command Center is running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It can almost spot these cyber attacks instantaneously.
WikiLeaks releases another batch of emails from Hillary Clinton's campaign.
There's an early 2014 email from Hillary Clinton, so not so long after she left Secretary of State, to her campaign manager, John Podesta. That email, it states that ISIS is funded by Saudi Arabia and Qatar, the governments of Saudi Arabia and Qatar. Now, this is I think this is the most significant email in the whole collection.
ISIL, or ISIS, is created largely with money from the very people who are giving money to the Clinton Foundation.
Yes.
For many of us, the end of the presidential race cannot come soon enough. The bitter exchange between the two major candidates is causing a ripple effect, with many heading to psychologists saying the stress of this election is getting to them.
One thing is abundantly clear. There has never been an election quite like this one, nor has there been one covered in the way this one has been.
I think this is the most dispiriting campaign I have ever covered, and I go back to 1980, the most negative campaign and the most issueless campaign. If you were to listen to the basic messages that the two candidates are putting out, he's saying that she's a crook, she's saying that he's a creep, and that's the basic message that the Americans are supposed to take into the polls right now when they're voting and up to and including Tuesday.
Now, Philadelphia's district attorney is overseeing a special, quote, election fraud task force to make sure that everything goes smoothly next week.
Authorities from nearly every state are asking the Department of Homeland Security to help make sure their election systems are safe from cyber attacks. This comes as federal officials take steps to counter any Election Day chaos, including cyber attacks that could spread misinformation about the candidates across social media.
With just days till the election, the FBI and the New York City Police Department are assessing the credibility of a possible Al-Qaeda terror attack against the U.S. on the eve of Election Day. Officials say New York, Texas, and Virginia were mentioned as possible targets, but that the information lacked specifics.
And it seemed to be working, his strategy, Mr. Maslansky, of doing selected interviews of people he knew he was going to get a fair shake with. But now he's not doing any. Is that smart?
Yeah, I think it is smart. His own worst enemy is still himself.
You know, I was outraged at the comments, over Senator McCain. I've been outraged at things like we go up, we come down, it's not that big a deal. But honestly, it's misinformation. I don't think it's intentional. And at this point, you have to make a choice. I mean, you can choose to take the high road for a third-party candidate that won't get anywhere, or you can choose between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. And if I have to make that choice, I'm going to choose Donald Trump, and I'm not going to waste my time getting offended by the little things.
There are growing concerns and a new report about a possible Al-Qaeda terrorist plot in the works, along with the ongoing threat from Russia's cyber terrorists.
There's always concern that terrorists and terror groups will use the election as a time to maximize impact of any attack. As of yet, nothing specific, but there are threats. When it comes to Russia, though, there's enormous evidence already that a massive information operation, as intelligence agents call it, is already underway to discredit and sow doubts about a very crucial American presidential election.
Some Democrats in Ohio are crying foul. They think some votes are being disqualified because of what they consider minor ballot errors.
Officials here in Ohio are getting ready. They are preparing to set thousands of ballots aside for minor mistakes. What qualifies as a minor mistake, we're told, something like having a signature on your ballot not match the signature that officials have on file for you. So what officials say that they do is they try to track the voter down who made the mistake, but if they never hear back, that ballot isn't going to count.
ISIL has claimed responsibility for a deadly car bomb attack in Diyarbakir, southeast Turkey, according to a statement by its Amaq news agency. It's the first attack in Turkey that the group has laid claim to. Iraqi government forces say they are steadily making ground in the fight for Mosul, but have met fierce resistance from ISIL fighters in the northern city. Troops are fighting street by street and say the eastern district of Al-Zahra is now 90% under their control.
In a tiny community, far from the regular protection of Afghanistan's security forces, villagers bury their dead. Husbands, fathers, mothers, wives, and many, many children.
A news agency affiliated with ISO has released a video showing it blowing up a Russian helicopter in a rural area of eastern Homs province. The Russian military confirmed one of its helicopters came under rebel fire while delivering humanitarian aid and was forced to make an emergency landing before being destroyed.
We do stand on the edge of a great new era.
We built this great industrial powerhouse.
The whole idea of industrial capitalism in the West, government that was going to invest in infrastructure.
It is a time for pathfinders and pioneers.
What happened to the American century?
The share of income that we put into infrastructure has gone down starkly.
If you travel around the country, there's just not that much that's new.
What happened to America's ideal of progress?
All these things that had been established after the Great Depression fell apart.
You'll see that whole streets are just closing down.
A community that's undereducated, underemployed.
Baltimore was a blue-collar town. Now the air quality is wonderful because there's no industry here anymore. It's beyond life.
Detroit had a population of about 2 million people in 1950. It's now a little over 600,000.
Huge percentage of the budget goes to the military. This is an economy that's based to a large degree on killing people.
If you were to cut the military budget in half, we'd have a depression in the United States.
So they're literally working full-time and making poverty wages.
You have 1,600 vacant houses. It's insane.
They said, let's save a few dollars and pump the water in from the Flint River.
Decades and decades of being ignored.
Americans are finding themselves in a desperate situation.
They're new slaves. A lot of talented people here, but you will never know because of the reputation we got.
If you're an entrepreneur right now in America, the last thing you want to do is take risk. This is not a world I want to take risk.
America is not the pillar of democracy and freedom that it was once seen to be.
Here we are, naked in front of the world. It's a real tragedy.